Judge Amara Osman had arrived 30 minutes early for the most important case of his career. But rookie officer Jessica Martinez saw only an old Muslim man with a beard and traditional dress. And her next words, "You people don't belong here," would become the most expensive mistake in Phoenix Police Department history. If you want to witness how 30 seconds of prejudice destroyed a police career and changed courtroom history forever, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because what happens next will leave you speechless about the price of discrimination. But let's go back to where it all began. The morning desert sun cast long shadows across the steps of Phoenix Superior Court as Judge Amara Osman adjusted his traditional white kufi and straightened his navy blazer. At 62, he had developed the habit of arriving early for significant cases, using those quiet moments to center himself before facing the day's most challenging decisions. Today's case would determine whether Police Sergeant Michael Torres would face criminal charges for the controversial shooting of an unarmed teenager during a traffic stop that had sparked 3 months of protests across Phoenix. Rookie officer Jessica Martinez patrolled the courthouse perimeter with the nervous energy of someone 6 months into her dream job. Fresh out of the police academy, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone trying to prove they belonged in uniform. Her training sergeant had specifically assigned her to courthouse security because of her attention to detail and what he called natural instinct for spotting trouble. The sight of the elderly Muslim man approaching the courthouse steps triggered every bias Jessica had absorbed during academy training about potential security threats. The traditional Islamic dress, the graying beard, the deliberate movements of someone who clearly didn't belong in American legal proceedings. Her hand moved instinctively to her radio as she intercepted what appeared to be an obvious security concern. "Excuse me, sir," Jessica called out, her voice carrying the authority she practiced in front of mirrors for months. "This building is restricted. Court proceedings are not open to the general public." Judge Osman paused on the limestone steps, his leather briefcase containing 30 years of legal precedents and case files that had shaped Arizona jurisprudence. "I understand," Osman replied calmly, his voice carrying the precise diction of someone who had spent decades addressing juries and appellate courts. "I'm here for this morning's session." Jessica studied his appearance more carefully. The traditional Islamic clothing, the prayer beads visible in his jacket pocket, the foreign accent that confirmed her suspicions about his intentions. "Sir, you need to understand something about American courtrooms." Jessica stepped closer, her voice taking on the tone she'd been taught for dealing with difficult civilians. "We have security protocols. People dressed like you, carrying unknown items, don't just walk into federal buildings without proper screening and documentation." A handful of early morning commuters began gathering as phones emerged to document what appeared to be developing confrontation. Local news intern David Park had arrived early to film courthouse exteriors for the evening report on the Torres case. His camera operator began rolling as they realized they were witnessing some kind of security incident. "Officer," Osman said quietly, reaching slowly for his briefcase, "perhaps there's been some misunderstanding." But Jessica interpreted the movement toward his case as a potential threat, her training kicking in with textbook precision. "Keep your hands visible," she commanded, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear clearly. "I'm simply reaching for identification," Osman explained patiently, his hands moving with deliberate slowness. "Court identification." But Jessica's imagination was filling in dangerous scenarios that didn't exist. Foreman, traditional religious dress, attempting to access federal courthouse, unknown materials in briefcase. "You people don't belong here," Jessica announced, her voice carrying across the plaza with devastating clarity. "This is an American courthouse for American legal proceedings. Take your foreign problems somewhere else." The words hit the morning air like gunshots, recorded by a dozen phones and immediately beginning their viral journey across social media platforms. David Park's eyes widened as he processed what he'd just captured. His whispered commentary went live on Channel 7's morning stream. "We're witnessing what appears to be religious discrimination outside Phoenix Superior Court, where Officer Jessica Martinez has just told a Muslim visitor he doesn't belong in American courtrooms." Osman felt the familiar sting of discrimination that 40 years in America hadn't dulled. But today, those words carried a different weight. Today, they were recorded by multiple cameras. Today, They would have consequences that extended far beyond personal humiliation. Officer Martinez, Osman said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Jessica's pulse quicken. Before you continue this conversation, perhaps you should ask yourself one question. What question? Jessica demanded, though something in his tone suggested she wouldn't like the answer. The gathering crowd pressed closer, phones raised, social media notifications pinging as the confrontation gained real-time traction across multiple platforms. How many federal judges have you told they don't belong in their own courthouses? The question hit Jessica like cold water. Federal judge. Own courthouse. The mathematical impossibility of her situation began crystallizing in her mind as her training collided with reality. Osman reached into his briefcase and withdrew a leather credential case bearing the seal of the Arizona Superior Court. Inside was judicial identification that made Jessica's hand shake as she read. Judge Amara Osman, Superior Court of Arizona, Criminal Division. The plaza fell silent except for the soft sounds of phones recording and David Park's breathless live commentary. Ladies and gentlemen, this is unprecedented. The Muslim man Officer Martinez just told doesn't belong here appears to be Judge Amara Osman. And if I'm reading the court schedule correctly, he's presiding over this morning's police shooting case. Jessica stared at the judicial credentials as her career prospects evaporated in real time. The Torres case. The judge who would determine whether her department faced federal oversight. The Muslim man she just told didn't belong in America. Officer Martinez, Osman said quietly, closing his credential case. In 25 minutes, you'll stand in my courtroom while I decide whether your department maintains federal funding. But first, you've just provided the media with perfect evidence of the discrimination this case is about. Jessica's radio crackled with urgent messages from her sergeant. The revolution would be live-streamed on courthouse steps, and justice would have a very different meaning by morning. Officer Jessica Martinez stared at Judge Osman's credentials as her 6-month police career crumbled in real time. The leather case bearing the Arizona Superior Court seal felt like a death sentence in her trembling hands. Around the courthouse plaza, 17 phones continued recording as her discrimination went viral across every social media platform. Judge Osman, Jessica's voice cracked with desperation. I had no way of knowing. Your appearance, the traditional clothing. But her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. David Park's live stream had reached 15,000 viewers as major news outlets began monitoring the feed. The hashtag courthouse bigotry was trending nationally. Appearance. Judge Osman repeated quietly, his voice carrying 30 years of judicial authority. Officer Martinez, in your 6 months of service, how many white men in business suits have you told they don't belong in American courtrooms? The question hung in the morning air like a legal indictment. Jessica's radio exploded with frantic communications from police headquarters. Martinez, report your status immediately. We're getting calls from the mayor's office about a discrimination incident involving a federal judge. Sergeant Rodriguez's voice carried the panic of someone watching a departmental crisis unfold on social media. Judge Osman consulted his watch, a gift from the Arizona Bar Association after 25 years of distinguished service. Officer Martinez, the Torres case begins in 22 minutes. The case that will determine whether your department faces federal oversight for discriminatory practices. His words carried the weight of institutional consequences. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. David Park whispered into his microphone. Officer Martinez just provided perfect evidence of the exact discrimination at the center of today's police shooting trial. Comments flooded the live stream. Justice. She's done. This is karma. A black sedan pulled up to the courthouse. Chief of Police Maria Santos, alerted by the social media storm brewing around her department. She emerged from the vehicle looking like someone whose worst nightmare was materializing in high-definition video. Martinez, she called out, her voice carrying across the plaza. Chief Santos, Judge Osman acknowledged professionally. Your officer and I were just discussing courthouse security protocols. The diplomatic understatement made Santos cringe visibly. She'd watched the viral videos during her emergency drive downtown. Judge Osman, on behalf of the Phoenix Police Department, I apologize unreservedly, Santos said, her words carefully chosen for the recording devices surrounding them. This incident does not represent our values or training standards. But everyone knew the apology was too late. The damage was viral, permanent, career-ending. Jessica looked between her chief and the judge she'd humiliated, realizing her dream job had become a national symbol of police discrimination. "Sir," she addressed Judge Osman directly, "what happens now?" Her voice carried the desperate hope of someone clinging to impossible redemption. "Now," Judge Osman replied, gathering his briefcase, "you learn that justice has perfect timing. In 19 minutes, I'll enter courtroom 3A to decide whether police discrimination requires federal intervention. Thanks to your demonstration, that decision just became much easier." The courthouse steps had become a courtroom of public opinion, where Officer Martinez had already been tried, convicted, and sentenced by 17 cameras and 50,000 social media witnesses. Santos placed her hand on Martinez's shoulder with the weight of someone delivering career last rites. "Officer, you're suspended pending internal investigation." Judge Osman walked toward the courthouse entrance as his phone buzzed with calls from news outlets requesting statements. "Ladies and gentlemen of the media," Judge Osman addressed the growing crowd, "court begins in 17 minutes. Justice, as you've witnessed, sometimes arrives exactly when it's needed most." The revolution would continue in courtroom 3A, where discrimination would meet its reckoning. Courtroom 3A buzzed with unprecedented tension as Judge Amara Osman took his position behind the mahogany bench that had been his domain for 3 decades. Every seat was packed with reporters, civil rights activists, police representatives, and Torres family members. The morning's discrimination incident had transformed what was already a high-profile case into a national referendum on police bias and judicial integrity. District Attorney Rachel Chun stood at the prosecution table, acutely aware that the morning's events had fundamentally altered the dynamics of her case against Sergeant Michael Torres. The viral videos of Officer Martinez's discrimination had provided her with the perfect opening argument about systemic police prejudice that she'd been struggling to establish for months. Defense attorney Marcus Williams adjusted his tie nervously, realizing that his strategy of portraying the Phoenix Police Department as a reformed, bias-free organization had evaporated on the courthouse steps. His client, Sergeant Torres, sat rigidly beside him, understanding that Martinez's recorded bigotry had just destroyed any hope of departmental credibility. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Osman began, his voice carrying the weight of morning's humiliation transformed into judicial authority. "Before we proceed with the Torres case, I must address the incident that occurred outside this courthouse 37 minutes ago." The courtroom fell silent as every recording device focused on his words. "Officer Jessica Martinez of the Phoenix Police Department informed me, and I quote from 17 recorded videos, that you people don't belong here and that this courthouse was reserved for American legal proceedings." Judge Osman's voice remained perfectly controlled, but the implications reverberated through the packed courtroom like thunder. Chief Santos, who had positioned herself in the back row, felt her department's reputation disintegrating with each word. The federal oversight she'd fought desperately to avoid was now inevitable, documented in high-definition video by dozens of witnesses and broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers. "Your Honor," Defense Attorney Williams attempted damage control. "Officer Martinez's actions this morning do not reflect," but Judge Osman raised his hand with absolute authority. "Mr. Williams, Officer Martinez's actions this morning provide perfect context for the systemic bias allegations in the Torres case." District Attorney Chin seized the moment. "Your Honor, if I may address the court about the pattern of discrimination that this morning's incident represents." She gestured toward the packed gallery where community activists held signs reading "Justice for Ahmed" and "End Police Bigotry." Torres shifted uncomfortably as he realized his fate was being decided not just by the evidence in his shooting case, but by his colleague's viral discrimination. The teenager he'd shot, Marcus Williams Jr., sat in the front row with his family, his wheelchair a constant reminder of the bullets that had shattered his spine during a traffic stop for a broken taillight. The defense has spent 3 months arguing that the Phoenix Police Department has reformed its discriminatory practices. DA Chun continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. But this morning, in front of this courthouse, We witnessed Officer Martinez tell a sitting federal judge that Muslims don't belong in American courtrooms. Judge Osman's phone vibrated with incoming calls from the Arizona Supreme Court, the governor's office, and CNN requesting statements. The morning's discrimination had elevated a local police shooting case in a national news about judicial integrity and police reform. Furthermore, DA Chun pressed her advantage. Officer Martinez's assumption that Judge Osman was a security threat based solely on his Islamic faith demonstrates the exact mindset that led Sergeant Torres to perceive 17-year-old Marcus Williams Jr. as dangerous enough to shoot 6 times during a routine traffic stop. The parallel hit the courtroom like lightning. Islamic judge equals security threat. Black teenager equals deadly danger. The same prejudicial thinking that had played out on courthouse steps and during a midnight traffic stop 6 months earlier. Sergeant Torres whispered urgently to his attorney, understanding that Martinez's discrimination had just provided prosecutors with the perfect evidence of police bias. Defense attorney Williams requested a brief recess, knowing his case had been destroyed by social media and unconscious prejudice captured in real time. Motion denied. Judge Osman replied firmly. This court has waited 6 months for justice in the Torres case. Mr. Torres, Officer Martinez, and the Phoenix Police Department have provided all the evidence of systemic bias that this trial requires. Chief Santos watched her department's federal funding disappear as Judge Osman continued speaking. The morning's discrimination had triggered automatic federal oversight protocols, consent decrees, and comprehensive bias training that would cost millions of dollars and years of implementation. Judge Osman consulted his legal notes, the same briefcase that Martinez had viewed as suspicious, containing precedents that would reshape Phoenix policing forever. The Torres case will proceed as scheduled, with the understanding that this morning's documented discrimination provides crucial context about police training, bias, and community relations. The courtroom gallery erupted in whispers as reporters live-streamed updates to audiences that had grown from thousands to hundreds of thousands. Martinez's 30 seconds of prejudice had become a watershed moment for police reform and judicial accountability. Court will recess for 15 minutes, Judge Osman announced, during which time the prosecution and defense will consider how this morning's events impact their respective strategies. As he stepped down from the bench, every camera followed his movement, documenting the judge whose dignity had transformed discrimination into justice. Outside the courtroom, Martinez sat in Chief Santos' office, staring at termination papers that had been prepared while she watched her career end on social media. The revolution had moved from courthouse steps to judicial chambers, where justice would be served with perfect timing. The 15-minute recess had stretched into an hour as Judge Osman's chambers became the epicenter of a media storm that was reshaping American conversations about police bias and judicial dignity. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from the ACLU, Department of Justice, and civil rights organizations offering support and demanding federal intervention in Phoenix police practices. CNN's Anderson Cooper was broadcasting live from the courthouse steps, where Officer Martinez's discrimination had been replayed thousands of times across social media platforms. What we witnessed this morning, Cooper told his national audience, represents a perfect microcosm of the systemic bias that communities of color face in American justice systems daily. Inside the courthouse, District Attorney Chun reviewed her closing arguments, knowing that Martinez's recorded bigotry had provided her with the strongest evidence of police discrimination she could have imagined. The parallel between Martinez's assumption about Judge Osman and Torres's deadly assumptions about 17-year-old Marcus Williams Jr. was devastating to the defense. Defense attorney Williams sat across from his client in a witness preparation room, watching their carefully constructed narrative collapse in real time. Sergeant Torres, he said quietly, Martinez's incident this morning has fundamentally changed our strategy. The jury will see your shooting decision through the lens of documented police prejudice. Torres stared at the viral videos playing on Williams's tablet, understanding that his career and freedom now depended on distancing himself from the discrimination that had just destroyed his colleague. I'm not like Martinez, he insisted desperately. My shooting was justified by the suspect's movements, not his race. But the courtroom gallery told a different story. Marcus Williams Jr.'s family occupied the front rows, their quiet dignity contrasting sharply with the chaos Martinez had created. The teenager's mother, Sarah Williams, had watched the morning's discrimination with grim recognition. The same assumptions that led Martinez to see Judge Osman as a threat had led Torres to see her son as dangerous. Chief Santos paced her temporary command post in the courthouse basement, fielding calls from the mayor's office, FBI Civil Rights Division, and Phoenix City Council members demanding immediate accountability. Martinez's 30 seconds of prejudice had triggered automatic federal investigations that would scrutinize every police action in the city for the next decade. "Ma'am," her deputy chief interrupted, "we have confirmation that the Department of Justice is opening a pattern and practice investigation into Phoenix PD. The Martinez incident has been classified as evidence of systemic discrimination." Santos felt her department's autonomy evaporating as federal oversight became inevitable. Judge Osman returned to his chambers, where a stack of legal briefs awaited his review. The Torres case had always been about more than one officer's split-second decision. It represented a nationwide reckoning with police bias, community trust, and institutional accountability. Martinez's discrimination had crystallized those abstract concepts into visceral, undeniable reality. At 2:47 p.m., court reconvened with an energy that crackled through the packed courtroom. Judge Osman's presence behind the bench carried additional weight, his authority amplified by the morning's humiliation transformed into judicial power. Every reporter, activist, and legal observer understood they were witnessing a watershed moment in American justice. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Judge Osman began, his voice carrying 30 years of legal experience. "You have been asked to determine whether Sergeant Michael Torres's actions during a traffic stop represented reasonable force or excessive violence. This morning's events outside this courthouse provide crucial context for your deliberations." The 12 jurors, 6 white, 3 black, 2 Latino, 1 Asian, shifted in their seats as they processed the connection between Martinez's discrimination and Torres's shooting decision. The same biased training, the same institutional culture, the same assumptions about threat assessment based on appearance and race. District Attorney Chen rose for her closing argument, knowing that Martinez's recorded words had already made her case more powerfully than any legal brief. "Members of the jury, this morning you witnessed Officer Jessica Martinez tell a federal judge that Muslims don't belong in American courtrooms. That assumption, that people of different faiths, different appearances, different backgrounds represent inherent threats, is exactly what led Sergeant Torres to fire 6 bullets into an unarmed teenager." Defense Attorney Williams attempted to separate his client from Martinez's actions, but the damage was irreversible. The viral videos had provided perfect evidence of police bias, documented in real time, with multiple camera angles and broadcast to millions of viewers. Torres's fate was sealed by his colleagues' prejudice. As closing arguments concluded, Judge Osman prepared to deliver instructions that would resonate far beyond Phoenix. The Torres case had become a referendum on police training, bias awareness, and community accountability. Martinez's discrimination had provided the missing piece of evidence that prosecutors had sought for months. The jury retired for deliberations carrying with them the weight of morning's discrimination, the image of a respected judge being told he didn't belong in his own courthouse, and the parallel recognition that similar assumptions had led to 6 bullets in a teenager's back. Outside the courtroom, Martinez cleaned out her desk as termination papers finalized her career's end. Her 30 seconds of prejudice had become a cautionary tale about discrimination's consequences, broadcast live to a nation grappling with questions of bias, justice, and institutional accountability. The verdict would arrive within hours, but the real judgment had already been delivered on courthouse steps, where Officer Martinez learned that assumptions have consequences and discrimination leaves permanent scars on more than just its victims. Justice was about to speak with perfect timing. The jury deliberated for exactly 43 minutes, the shortest time in Phoenix Superior Court history for a police shooting case. As they filed back into courtroom 3A at 4:17 p.m., their expressions carried the weight of a decision that had been made inevitable by 30 seconds of discrimination captured on 17 phones. Judge Amara Osman surveyed the packed courtroom one final time, his authority, now amplified by the morning's humiliation, transformed into institutional change. The same briefcase that Officer Martinez had viewed as suspicious contained legal precedents that would reshape American policing for decades to come. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Osman asked, his voice carrying across a courtroom that had become the epicenter of national conversations about bias, justice, and accountability. Jury foreman Patricia Williams, no relation to the victim, stood with papers that would end one career while vindicating another. "We have, Your Honor," Williams replied clearly. "In the matter of excessive force charges against Sergeant Michael Torres, we find the defendant guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted in a controlled explosion of vindication, grief, and justice finally served. Marcus Williams Jr.'s mother sobbed quietly as her son's shooting was officially recognized as criminal violence. Sergeant Torres collapsed into his chair as 20 years of police service evaporated in a single sentence. His attorney whispered urgently about appeals, but everyone knew that Martinez's morning discrimination had provided prosecutors with unshakable evidence of systemic police bias that made Torres's conviction inevitable. Furthermore, Foreman Williams continued, "The jury wishes to state that Officer Martinez's discriminatory actions this morning provided crucial context for understanding how police bias translates into deadly force." Her assumption that Judge Osman represented a threat based solely on his Islamic faith demonstrates the exact mindset that led Sergeant Torres to perceive an unarmed teenager as dangerous enough to shoot. Chief Santos felt her department's federal funding disappear as the verdict triggered automatic Justice Department oversight. The consent decree she'd fought desperately to avoid was now inevitable, documented in viral videos and validated by criminal conviction. Phoenix PD would spend the next decade under federal supervision. Judge Osman rose to deliver sentencing, his words carrying the weight of morning's discrimination transformed into afternoon's justice. "Sergeant Torres, your actions 6 months ago destroyed a young man's future and shattered community trust in law enforcement. Today's verdict represents not vengeance, but accountability. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after serving minimum 5 years. Additionally, you are permanently barred from law enforcement in any capacity." Torres was led away in handcuffs as cameras documented the end of a career built on assumptions that had finally met consequences. But Judge Osman wasn't finished. "Ladies and gentlemen of the media, court officers, and citizens present today, you have witnessed how quickly discrimination becomes headlines, how bias becomes criminal conviction, and how 30 seconds of prejudice can reshape institutional accountability forever." Outside the courthouse, Martinez sat in her car reading termination papers while watching her discrimination replayed on every news channel. Her assumption about Judge Osman had cost her career, her pension, and her reputation. The viral videos would follow her forever, a permanent reminder that prejudice carries consequences. Anderson Cooper concluded his live broadcast from courthouse steps where the morning's revolution had begun. "What we witness today represents more than individual accountability. It demonstrates how ordinary citizens with phones can document discrimination and demand systemic change in real time." Judge Osman's final press conference drew hundreds of reporters to the courthouse plaza where Martinez's discrimination had started a national conversation. Officer Martinez's words this morning, that Muslims don't belong in American courtrooms, revealed assumptions that permeate law enforcement training nationwide. Today's verdict proves that bias has consequences. 6 months later, the Martinez-Osman Protocol would become mandatory training at police academies nationwide. Jessica Martinez would spend her remaining years teaching diversity workshops, sharing her story of how 30 seconds destroyed everything she'd worked for. Judge Osman would receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for advancing civil rights through judicial excellence. Emma Rodriguez, now Phoenix PD's Director of Community Relations, would implement body cameras and bias training that transformed police-community relationships. Marcus Williams Jr. would graduate law school and become a civil rights attorney, his wheelchair a constant reminder of assumptions' deadly consequences. The courthouse steps where discrimination had met its reckoning became a memorial to the power of documentation, citizen journalism, and ordinary people refusing to stay silent when witnessing injustice. A bronze plaque would read, "Here, prejudice became justice, assumptions became accountability. In 30 seconds changed everything." Judge Amara Osman returned to his chambers at sunset, his prayer app chiming softly as it had that morning. The same innocent sound that had triggered Martinez's career-ending discrimination. In the quiet of his office, he smiled and prepared for evening prayer, knowing that justice sometimes arrives exactly when it's needed most. The revolution had been live-streamed, documented, and delivered. The transformation would last forever. What discrimination will you document today? Share your experiences below. Subscribe if you believe dignity isn't negotiable. The next Judge Osman is waiting for their citizen journalist. Will that be you?